Um, Thank you all for joining us this morning. My name is Rebecca Ward, and I am a postdoctoral research scholar with NC State University. And I'm pleased to be introducing today's webinar toward equitable community resilience partnerships, addressing non-climate socioeconomic stressors, needs, and threat multipliers. This is the first webinar in our Spring 2024 series on community engaged research, brought to you by C3HE, the Carolinas Collaborative on Climate Health and Equity, the NOAA Carolinas Climate Adaptation Partnership. We have a great panel lined up, led by C3HE co-PI, Dr. Jeffrey Hebron, Professor of Sustainability Sciences at Furman University. Before we jump into today's topic, I want to spend just a few moments introducing C3HE. Like I said, we are a NOAA Carolinas Climate Adaptation Partnership. We are one of 13 regional centers nationwide working alongside communities to foster climate resilience. We are housed at NC State University, and we are a multi-institution team composed of physical and social scientists, community leaders, researchers, outreach professionals, and students. And our work centers on building community partnerships to advance climate resilience and health equity. We work together with communities across the Carolinas to help predict and understand their exposure and vulnerability to consecutive and compounding climate hazards such as flooding, heat, and drought. And our team's focus is on understanding our changing climate, but also addressing the impacts in a just and equitable way. So we bring together insights from social science, physical science, and regional knowledge to collaboratively create solutions. We also focus our efforts on frontline and at-risk populations, and in so doing, aim to support communities that are facing higher exposure to climate hazards and other interconnected social challenges. If you'd like to learn more about our program, we encourage you to visit our website here at the bottom of the screen, carolinascap.com. We also encourage you to join our webinar series, so thank you for being here today. We will also have 3 more webinars scheduled in this series, taking place on the last Tuesday of each month at 11 a.m. If you've registered today, you should have received that Zoom link for all the subsequent webinars in this series, so we hope that we can see you there. I'm now going to turn things over to Dr. Hebron to introduce today's topic, our panelists, and to kick things off.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. I am Jeffrey Hebron. I'm at Furman University here in Greenville, South Carolina. And I will be the person who organized the speakers and the big wordy title for today. And I just wanted to first start with just some of the rationale behind the title and the theme. So we're focusing on community engagement for our webinar series for the semester. And I wanted to really focus on the idea of partnerships because that's something that C3HE is really fostering. And we all know in order to address complex problems, we need to have a lot of partnerships. And then the focus on resilience, the ability to bounce back after disturbance, and not only to bounce back, but hopefully to bounce back and be better equipped to respond to a disturbance and change in the future, certainly that's caused by climate change. And then I wanted to focus on the non-climate stressors. So these would be things that aren't related to climate that might cause some stress. And so some of those things within our lexicon of non-climate stressor is any change or trend unrelated to the climate that can exacerbate hazards. So some of the development that we have on the land. So if we're already altering drainage patterns, and replacing open lands with roads and buildings, that would be a non-climate stressor because we would anticipate to have more precipitation, larger precipitation events, and because we're doing things that aren't related to climate change that would exacerbate those would be a non-climate stressor. And then the focus on socioeconomic non-climate stressors are those that would be things like population growth would be a socioeconomic non-climate stressor, anything related to increasing vulnerability, race, class, income, anything with political stability, health, budgets, legal frameworks are things that would be socioeconomic non-climate stressors. And then the idea of a threat multiplier. So it's not just that you have these multiple stressors, is that they interact and make things worse. So one of the threat multipliers that I've interacted with, and one of our panelists as well, is the idea of heirs property. So this is when community members have land that's impacted by a storm, for example, but they don't have a legal deed to that property. And so their family might have lived on the land for hundreds of years, but no one actually has a deed for that property. So if a flood happens, of course, that damages their property, their homes, and their health. But what makes it worse is that FEMA will come in and say, okay, I can have X amount of dollars that you can get to try to make you whole, but then they're not eligible for it because they don't have a proper deed for that property. So that's a threat multiplier. So it's one thing to have a loss to a home, but then you actually lose the ability to get funds to help you recover from that loan. So that's what is meant by a threat multiplier. So hopefully that makes sense in terms of the framework for that. And so our speakers, so I teach here at Furman University in Greenville, but I live in Asheville, North Carolina. And so our project goes across the Carolinas, and my experiences have been directly with each of these wonderful people and their organizations. And so I wanted to highlight some of the good work that I've seen happening in Asheville and in the South Carolina. So that's why I've asked our panelists to come speak to us and share their experiences. Each of these folks is doing lots of things in lots of different areas and lots of different ways. And what we've asked them to do is focus on one project in particular that we'll have a conversation with the rest of the webinar time. So at this point in time, I would like to start with our panelists, and we can go from left to right on the screen. So please just introduce yourself, who you are, who's your organization, your role within that organization. And then once everybody does their introductions, then we'll come back and hear about the project that they want to emphasize today. So I'll turn it over to Evangeline.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey. I'm Evangeline Costa with Trees Upstate. We're located in Greenville, South Carolina. My role is that of manager of community outreach and engagement. And the project I'm going to focus on and we'll talk about later is the Neighborwoods Project.
Thank you. Becky.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Becky Ryan. I'm the North Coast Office Director with the Coastal Conservation League. We're an environmental advocacy nonprofit dedicated to working to protect our natural resources and quality of life for the coastal South Carolina plain. And I'm very happy to be here. Thank you so much.
And Renee.
Hi, thank you. Renee Fortner. I am the Watershed Resources Manager at Riverlink. We're based in Asheville, and we are an urban conservation land trust. And we have 3 core programs. We do land conservation work so we can conserve properties, protect them from development to benefit water quality. We have a youth education program, and then our water resources program, which I oversee, is focused on protecting and improving water quality and habitat throughout the French Broad River watershed in Western North Carolina.
Great. Well, thanks so much. Like I said, when I came here at Furman and to Asheville, my focus has always been in equitable community resilience, and I teach in the sustainability science program. And one of the things I've always noticed is focusing on socioeconomic issues and vulnerable communities is something that didn't rise to the level of suitable engagement that we've seen. But then interacting with these colleagues, I've seen their work and their organization do that. And so what we wanted to do was to have each of them share an overview of the project that they want to talk about within that. So again, they're involved in so many different things, but we wanted them just to identify one project. So they will give you a summary of that project, and then we'll come back later to talk about more specific things about the project. So we'll go in reverse order. So Renee, if you could start with your project, and then we'll go to Becky and Evangeline.
Sure. I'm excited to talk about our Southside Community Stormwater Project. And we completed the construction on this it was last summer, but it was a 2-year process of community engagement and project design and then construction. And so the Southside Stormwater Project came about through a watershed restoration planning process where we had gotten grant funding to look at water quality issues in 2 streams that flow through down and near downtown Asheville and then into the French Broad River. And we knew there were water quality issues within these streams as well as the river itself. And so our watershed plan, we kind of scoured the watershed, looking at where are the water quality issues, where are the sources of pollution, are there any flooding issues within the watershed? And this type of work, you always want to do it within the context of, who lives in the watershed, what are the watershed demographics? So we also looked at the different communities within this area and recognized that there were several historic African-American neighborhoods within this watershed, marginalized communities. And as we were looking for problem areas, we were working within an Asheville Housing Authority neighborhood called Erskine Apartments. And so this is public housing. And we noticed that there was some runoff happening on a residential parking lot within this apartment complex. And it was obviously an ongoing problem because there was algae growing on the parking lot because it was consistently wet. And one of the residents came out of the apartment when they saw us looking at this and noted that it'd been going on for a long time, and in the winter it would freeze over and it would create this slippery situation for people trying to get in and out of their cars. And they're like, are you going to do something about this? And so we saw a need within this community to address this flooding issue, but then also we recognized that there was failing stormwater infrastructure within this apartment complex that was built in the late 60s. A lot of hard impervious surfaces generating runoff that had no treatment whatsoever. And most of the runoff was being piped into a local stream that's referred to as Nasty Branch because of the long-term ongoing water quality issues within this stream. So we saw an opportunity here to help address the community's needs, and that was the flooding on the parking lot, but then also look for opportunities to install some green infrastructure to properly treat and manage all of the runoff that was being generated from the rooftops and the parking lots within this apartment complex. And so we got grant funding to create a concept design. And we worked closely with the Asheville Housing Authority staff. And we also, through the watershed planning process, we had met people working within the Southside community, residents, elders within the community that were interested in being a part of the planning process. And so we developed a core group of stakeholders that we met with regularly, where and then we had an engineering firm that we were working with on the design of the stormwater features. And so through the stakeholder engagement process, we would create a design, come back to the stakeholders, get their input on it, tweak the design based on their feedback. They also helped us identify some opportunities to provide some much needed community amenities as part of the project. So things like safe walking paths to connect the apartment buildings to one another, as well as to the community center there in that neighborhood. Edible plants was something that residents were interested in. There's a big movement within the community to build more food security because the Southside community exists within a food desert, and a shaded structure for people to hang out under because there's not a lot of tree canopy cover there, a memorial garden, and some just general nice seating areas for people to hang out outside. And so we were able to get grant funding through a variety of funders, private foundations, state grants that are focused on water quality to build pretty substantial green infrastructure stormwater project that has community amenities as part of it. And we completed construction on this last summer, and we're still engaged in the community there with just ongoing stewardship of this new green space that's been created.
Yeah, it's been a really great project and really well received and a beautiful project as well. So if you get a chance to get to Asheville, I encourage you to check it out. Thank you so much. All right, Becky, what do you all have today?
Thank you. Yeah. So as you mentioned, I'm sure each of our organizations have many projects going on. Like I said, I'm the North Coast Office Director, so I cover the northeast corner of South Carolina, including Horry County, where Myrtle Beach is, which is one of the fastest growing counties in the country, certainly one of the fastest growing in the state of South Carolina. And we've been working since the summer of 2021 with the Bucksport community that's outside of Conway. It is sandwiched in between the PD and the Waccamaw Rivers. It's a historic settlement community, really established after the Civil War, and has strong Gullah Geechee traditions. And it has been experiencing repetitive major flooding events almost every year since 2015, certainly with Hurricane Matthew in 2016 and Hurricane Florence in 2018 being the biggest storms. And so American Rivers, actually, Janae Davis with American Rivers brought together community members, state agencies, nonprofits like the Coastal Conservation League, different academics. So Dr. Hebron, Coastal Carolina University, even some grad students from Duke University, all to meet with the community, hear what their concerns were, and come up with a list of priorities and an coordinated effort to try to address these issues. It's a whole host of issues, flooding being the number one issue, but along with that, many other concerns such as cultural preservation, economic development, just maintaining the rural character of the community. So we have really tried to have a community-led coalition with focus on the Association for the Betterment of Bucksport, being a local community-based nonprofit, to try to address these issues. Doing a host of projects. I saw a picture from the rain garden that we did in one of the intro slides. So we have monthly meetings to bring everybody together to talk about updates. But, along with those flooding concerns, they're also experiencing major development pressures as Conway and the Myrtle Beach area expand. There's a proposed road project, a 4-lane highway that would go through the Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge, which borders Bucksport, go through Bucksport, be a new river crossing over the Waccamaw River and into Burgess, which is another settlement community. And so that is up for discussion right now with a transportation sales tax that Horry County is considering. It if it passes county council, it'll be on a ballot referendum in November, and that would put $1.56 billion towards this road project formerly called the Southern Evacuation Lifeline, and now called the SE Highway 22 extension, that could have major impacts for Bucksport. But like Dr. Hebron mentioned, with the flooding concerns, there's also heirs property considerations, and until recently, many of those residents were blocked from getting FEMA dollars. FEMA has updated their qualifications a little bit since then. I'm not sure how effective it's been to make sure that those impacted with heirs property are getting assistance from disaster recovery efforts, but we have seen some change. But there's also a huge mistrust between the residents of Bucksport and county officials. Bucksport has felt largely ignored until recently. And then with a proposed project from the county, there were questions that the community members had that the county officials didn't like to answer. So we've been working to try to amplify the voices of the residents and make that connection for them between between residents and the county officials to ensure that they are heard. So it's a whole host of issues, and going on 3 years of the project. So I wish we could say that we've made significant strides, but it's really been baby steps.
Thanks so much, Becky. Okay, Evangeline.
Thank you. Our project, so let me begin by saying that Trees Upstate has a very simple mission, and it is simply to plant, protect, and promote trees in the upstate region of South Carolina. And with that, in 2020, we launched a tree canopy study with the city in partnership with the city of Greenville. And what we learned is that there were several neighborhoods that were had extremely low canopy. And so we created a low canopy map. And once we overlaid that map over the city's map, we realized there was a bigger issue. We realized that the areas that were missing trees were all areas that were once redlined by the federal government. And I'm sure most of you understand what redlining is. And if not, then take a moment to do some research on redlining. But the short version is that when these areas were redlined, they were restricted from bank loans. And the majority of the residents in these communities are of color. So it's either lower moderate income residents or mostly African-American residents in these neighborhoods. So we looked around, and at the same time we were looking to see how we could help and who we could help. We were contacted by a resident who introduced us to the community meeting, and we attended the community meeting and shared with them our concerns about the area having a lack of trees. The reason why that lack of trees is important because the same community was one of the hottest neighborhoods every summer. And so there was no shade, very little shade to bring down the temperature. And with climate change, we noticed that, of course, it's just going to be getting hotter every year. So through that community meeting, we've had a few residents say that they were interested in helping us in any way that they could. And they led us to a nonprofit called Homes of Hope. And Homes of Hope is affordable housing, an affordable housing agency, and has it had about 100, over 100, I think 110 properties in this West Greenville community that we were targeting. Through this partnership that we created with them, we were able to identify the area, clearly identify an area that we could target. So we went door to door, reaching stakeholders to see if we could talk to them about our concern about bringing in more trees to provide shade, to reduce their utility bills, as well as to make the neighborhood a little more walkable. Because what we found out through interviews is that the seniors hated going outside because it was so hot. And they would just simply go out. They wouldn't walk across the street to visit their neighbor. They would make an excuse not to walk and would drive around the community. And so this was about a 6-month project, and we started knocking on doors, getting residents to sign up for this project to allow us to plant trees. When we offered trees to residents, we also gave them the opportunity to select the tree that they wanted. And by doing this, we realized that we were creating cohesiveness and a stickiness, not only to the tree, but also to the community. Because we would say, what tree would you like? What tree is in your best interest? What would help bring down your utility bill? Can we give you some more information about that tree? And so we got complete buy-in from this community to plant trees. And then they came back to us and said, we'd like a 5-year plan. And we thought, okay, they're buying into it and they're seeing the bigger picture. Fast forward, we were able to plant through Homes of Hope. We were given a list of 110 houses, of which about half of them qualified for for a tree, a free tree. And the beauty in that is that it allowed us to then go to their neighbors who were not Homes of Hope residents, but to say to them, Homes of Hope is doing this. Would you like a free tree as well? And so this past October, we were able to plant 130 trees in West Greenville. And more importantly, or equally important, we had 300 volunteers come out to help us plant trees. And they all walked away understanding that they weren't just planting trees, but they were planting fresh air, they were providing shade, they were helping reduce future utility bills, they were bringing neighbors together. And one of the most beautiful things I saw during this whole process is neighbors actually coming out into their yards and speaking to neighbors that they had pretty much ignored for years. So that's a quick overview of the West Greenville project. We call it Neighbor Woods. And it's been, we're duplicating it across, not just across Greenville, but also in the entire upstate. So we'll be rolling out, meeting residents in Spartanburg in the fall.
Thanks so much for that, Evangeline. So hopefully that gives folks a flavor of the range of projects that are going on in here. And so each one is sort of talking about infrastructure in a little different way. But we also want to get into like, what are those stressors that would happen? So clearly we have a couple projects that are focused more on the water cycle, right? In terms of stormwater, that's one level of stressor, but then we have the larger climate change that's going to have riverine flooding that's going to happen. And then we have heat. So those would be our climate stressors that are coming on into these projects. And at least from my perspective, an interesting thing is, and you all, I'm interested in hearing what you say, is I would say none of these were climate driven projects that people set out and said, oh, let's go out and do something for climate change. There were other issues that you all were addressing, but hey, while we're considering climate change, they all could be exacerbated by climate change in terms of how it might impact the project or how these projects contribute to adaptation of those. So I'm curious from your perspectives, the role of climate, but also more importantly, the role of non-climate stressors that influence the rollout of the project. So it either in how the project came to be, or in terms of what you're encountering as you go along, in terms of what are those non-climate stressors that contribute to how you address your project in any way. And I'll just open it up and whoever wants to wave a hand and start. Thank you.
Well, I'll start. One of the non-climate stresses we saw in this community that we never considered was the fact that trains ran through West Greenville. And with those trains come a certain amount of dust, possibly toxins, but it was the dust level, the noise level that residents were complaining about, and their homes abutted the railroad tracks. In addition to that, the other item we ran into was neighbors complaining about invasive growth. So we're seeing a lot of kudzu and ivy and other invasive plants right along the railroad track because that soil had been disturbed. And so those were items that were not technically part of climate change considerations, but they were stressors in the community that we were able to address by planting trees.
I can go next. So certainly the development pressures that Bucksport is facing are a non-climate stressor that's exacerbating some of the climate stressors. So the flooding is riverine flooding, but we've seen a disproportionate deforestation rate for Bucksport, largely due to development and some interesting actors in the area. The water and sewer utility has cut down a large number of the trees of the area that's exacerbating the flooding. And then this looming road project, we certainly raise issues about it exacerbating the flooding issues that they're already facing. if it were to go forward through the increased impervious surface, but also the destruction of the wetlands, especially within the Waccamaw National Wildlife Refuge, that is estimated to have stored millions, if not billions, of gallons of water during Hurricane Florence. And if we lose those ecosystem services from the wetlands, it will just make everything worse for Bucksport. But they're facing a lot of other stressors just for the cultural preservation side of things. It's an aging population. Younger generations frequently are moving out of the area to seek job opportunities elsewhere. And so many of the residents that I work with are senior citizens. And so that's a concern for them as well, wanting to make it a place that the younger generations want to stay and build their lives. So there's no real one stressor for them. It's a whole host that they're facing.
Yeah, I think in terms of non-climate stressors, certainly socioeconomic issues, sort of a lack of investment in and around some of these communities, particularly the Southside community. This neighborhood that we were working in was heavily impacted by urban renewal in the 1970s. So during urban renewal, the city of Asheville got federal funding to make improvements and address blighted properties within the city, and the way it played out resulted in a major disruption in the Southside community, where there were hundreds of homes and businesses owned by Black residents that were purchased with very little compensation for those property owners, and those homes and businesses were demolished and removed. And then these public housing apartment complexes were built, and a lot of the people who lost their homes and businesses ultimately ended up in these public housing apartment complexes because they couldn't afford to turn around and then buy another home in a different area. And so there's a legacy of this neighborhood. Today you can see the legacy of the urban renewal, and systemic racism, and that this neighborhood has some of the lowest income in terms of census data in all of Asheville. And so couple that with the age of these communities, these apartment complexes, and the failing infrastructure. And so the needs are really great there in terms of septic or sewer and stormwater and water infrastructure. And so limited budget in terms of what the housing authority can do. And so it's important, I think, speaking to the partnerships and how important collaboration is in terms of making these big improvements. And so we had to, partner with private foundations. As I mentioned, one of the funding partners on this project was the Dogwood Health Trust Fund. And they helped fund some of the community amenities, but then the state and federal grants that we received were critical to addressing some of the aging and the failing infrastructure that was occurring here.
Good. Well, thanks. And so as we hear in each of these areas, we have the community itself having some historical ramifications that play themselves out in terms of what we want to do currently. The past has influencing kind of the present and the potential future for where we go forward. And in each of the spaces, there's a concern about what happened in the past, and also a concern about some displacement that might be happening. Because certainly in Greenville and in Asheville, there's a lot of development pressure in terms of gentrification and who's there, history of redlining or racial covenants as being a part of that issue. And then in Bucksport, the concern about development in the greater Horry County area, pushing people out, and new developments like roads coming in being one of those threats. But you each have also talked about how you've engaged in partnerships And clearly, these are projects that we might say, hey, there are positive things that are being developed out of those. So are there any strategies, particularly that you were using to address sort of the context in which you wanted to do? So it wasn't just doing rain gardens, it wasn't just doing stormwater or planting trees. We see that happening everywhere. You plant trees, you do stormwater improvements and so forth. Are there any specific strategies you can highlight to us that were important to you in terms of accomplishing the work that you all are doing?
I don't think I can emphasize enough. We've really tried to center the community in our strategies and make sure that any projects that are proposed that the community is part of and brought into it and directing it as much as possible. So really trying to have this be a community-led coalition. Community members are invited to every meeting, usually are there, even if it's just one or two members that are meeting. So we have monthly coalition meetings. They used to be bi-monthly. But, and we can talk about this later with one of the challenges that we've seen, but, there's a certain amount of fatigue that comes along with that, having community members meet even monthly. But I think the reason why we have had success and why this coalition has continued on, going on 3 years, even if it's not as robust as it was when it first started, we've had longevity because the community has remained a part of it, and hopefully they see themselves at the center of it. We try to put them at the center.
And I have to agree with Becky, bringing having the community sit at the table from the first bit of interest in this project for the community, for West Greenville, was really important. Going out door to door, and often with the neighborhood president, the president of the neighborhood association, going out, getting her endorsement, having her there to answer some of the objections. Because yes, this was a community that had been thriving at one point with its series of businesses and movie theaters, and then to see the area neglected for so many years with city and state dollars. And then all of a sudden, the community, because of its close proximity to downtown Greenville, which is thriving and growing significantly in the last 10 years, there was some hesitancy. So it was always good. It was hesitancy because of gentrification threats. So it was always good to have our partners there, whether it be Homes of Hope, helping us identify, but also to endorse us with their, basically to endorse us and say that we support them, we support what they're doing, was really important to the success of the program.
Yeah, I would say outreach was probably the most critical strategy, and really emphasizing our outreach and education helped lead to a successful project. So we spent a lot of time on the front end before we even started, doing design work on the project. And one of the early conversations that I had with an elder in the Southside community, they told me that they talked a lot about broken trust, and with the city of Asheville, and promises that had been made to them that they didn't follow through on. And so they advised us to not overpromise what we could do for the community. And they recommended that we communicate regularly, don't leave them in the dark for extended periods of time throughout the process, and to show up at community events and community meetings. And through those things, that's how we could build trusted relationships within the community, and just be transparent about what our goals are. And it was challenging at times. We would set up a table and we would advertise in the community that we were going to have this event and we're going to talk about this project, and it'd be a chance to get feedback. And very few people would show up, and so we had to really take a variety of approaches to ensure that we were getting the message across about the project and getting good feedback so that we felt good about the project and how it was going to play out. And so we started going where people were already gathering, so sort of piggybacking on community events. If we were invited to participate, of course we wouldn't just show up unannounced, but we found that to be really, really helpful. And then doing a mixture of online surveys, in person, door to door, again going to where people already are. And then we were able, through our grant funding, to incentivize participation in the surveys, and that was also really helpful to get feedback, so that when it was all said and done, we had a project that was really shaped by the community.
That was excellent. And you're already shifted into the next part of the conversation, which is some of the obstacles that you addressed and how you were able to do those, and sort of that we talk about partnerships, and I'll come to Becky next because you were talking about some of those obstacles as well, and sort of trajectory of a project, and okay, communities at the center, but how do you maintain that? And then Renee was also emphasizing that in terms of like, you might show up and nobody's there. And so how do you piggyback on other community events to get that? But one of the ways you overcome that also is having those incentives. So if you have some financial ways of helping people participate, that's one of the ways that you can get over part of that obstacle. So I'll turn it over to Becky if you could expand more in terms of this community participation as an obstacle, even though this is where we're all trying to be centered.
Yeah, so like I mentioned, certainly having twice a month meetings with the community was a lot to ask. As the coalition was getting started, we certainly cut those back to just once a month, but we've had a lot of folks, academics, coming in to do different studies. And I think there's a certain amount of fatigue with that as well. The residents are tired of putting a pin on a map for where flooding has occurred. So we've also really tried to coordinate efforts amongst different research projects, and not to say that these were done just for the academics, good intentions to try to model the flooding that the community has been seeing, but rather than starting from scratch, trying to take some of the existing data that's already been collected to expand on models or something like that, so that we're not asking folks to keep putting pins on a map, and then they can be frustrated with that if nothing comes of it. We've had a lot of studies without a lot of action taken, and that's really something that we're trying to address as well. We've had 4 rain garden projects in the community, and a 5th coming this spring, and that has been great. The community has been very involved with those. They do not address the riverine flooding issues. At best, they help with just local rain events that might have some flooding in the yard, rather than the big overarching riverine flooding issues that the whole community is facing. So that's something that we're still trying to work on and trying to address, but that's going to be a lengthy process because we're talking about sizable projects. I mentioned that Horry County, their stormwater department is trying a flood mitigation project. It originally started out with just raising a dirt road and putting in 3 culverts, and in the event of a major flood, putting out sandbags to try to address the flooding. We had major concerns and amplified the concerns of the community that did not seem like a long-term solution. And so they've revised that project some to include a mechanized floodgate. But still, this has been a long process because it just felt like the county was not being transparent with the plans and not answering the questions for the community about some unintended consequences, where the water was going to go if you're essentially creating a dam for the main part of Bucksport. Is that going to affect their neighbors on the other side of a highway, the Little Lamb community. They didn't want their flooding issues to be addressed just to cause flooding for somebody else. So, working with independent engineers, we got a grant with the Thriving Earth Exchange to have an engineer from the University of Texas at Arlington to review the project, because there was such a lack of trust with Horry County and their engineering firm that they were partnering with. So just to get a second set of eyes on it, or third set of eyes on it even, to give an expert opinion. So I think the county has a long way to go to earn the trust of the community, but hopefully we can convince them to be transparent and to answer questions and continue to host community meetings for these major projects that could have lasting impacts, not just for Bucksport, but for the surrounding area as well.
All right. There is a question for you, Renee, in terms of, you brought up one way of overcoming that is the incentives. So the question is, we're curious to learn more about the kinds of incentives you offered for the surveys. How did you determine the right amount for an incentive?
Yeah, we provided Visa gift cards. I believe those are $25 Visa gift cards that we gave out. I don't know. I mean, I kind of just, I thought, okay, well, this is a short survey. It'll take this amount of time. It seemed like a fair amount. It seemed like a sizable enough amount to make it worth someone's while to do it. And then, it also had to fit within our grant budget. So we had a budget for outreach, and so it was like a balance of being able to provide an incentive that would make it worthwhile for someone to spend a half hour. I mean, it wasn't even that long actually of a survey, but while also stretching our grant budget dollars as far as we could go. And, we would also provide food at our tabling events, which I think that was the biggest incentive for like the kids in the neighborhood, because there's a lot of kids that live in that apartment complex. So they would come out and eat pizza with us, and we talk about the project. And yeah, so those were our incentives.
Thank you. Evangeline, any obstacle that you all encountered and how you address those?
You mean how many doors are closed on us as we knock on doors? Yes, definitely. We have the key obstacle that comes up is people's fear of trees. And so the last thing someone wants, if someone has been, even if they haven't had a personal experience of a tree falling on their house or nearby, the 6 o'clock news has provided enough of visuals. So they'll say, I don't want a tree. It's going to fall on the house. And I don't want it to be 50 feet in 2 years. And so we will address their concerns. And of course, we can't combat the reality that someone has experienced. So if they've had a tree fall, there's nothing we could say or do that can work against that. But some basic education we found has turned the table, and people have said, oh, okay, I didn't know it was going to take 15 years before the tree grew 10 feet. Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm fine with that. I thought it was a big issue overnight. Other obstacles we've gone through is getting people initially, not so much in West Greenville, but in other communities, having them come out and participate in more than just a 5-minute discussion, because trees are not top of mind for these residents. And they'll say to us, look, I've got bigger problems than you planting a tree in my yard. I have affordable housing issues. My neighborhood is being gentrified, and now my taxes are going up. So a tree is not going to help me. Or the one that we started encountering in the community called Southern Side was one of, I have a big tree in my backyard now. I have a 100-year-old live oak tree in my backyard. How are you going to help me? And what can you do? I've got I'm a senior citizen, and a tree is the least of my concerns right now. And through that, we were able to start a workforce development program. We're in our second cohort right now. And through that, we've been able to help residents with small issues in their yards. And that's built a lot of trust and appreciation and gratitude, where it's not us just asking residents if we can plant trees, but we're also providing solutions to some of their key problems.
Thanks so much. So we'll end with this in terms of helping residents. Give your organizations an opportunity to speak to everyone else who's on the call and think about, are there any things that your organization might need, resources, ideas, partnerships, whatever, that we can maybe appeal to those on the call, and they can follow up with you either now or afterwards in terms of building upon the good work that you've already done. So if we can each, take a minute or two to kind of like give some update in terms of what your organization might need to keep your good work going. And we'll start with Becky, and then Renee and Evangeline.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate this question. We are always looking for more expertise, especially I am not a hydrologist. I'm not an engineer. We are always needing more engineers and hydrologists to help us come up with solutions, especially nature-based solutions. We're really trying to encourage nature-based solutions to address these issues that Bucksport is facing. But I mean, it doesn't have to be just science areas. We also need ideas for economic development and cultural preservation. So anthropologists or economists, anybody who's interested, we're always looking for more help to join the coalition and provide ideas for the community.
Thanks.
Hi. Thinking about needs. We could always use like 10 more staff people, I feel like, but I don't think this group can can help us with that. We are in the midst of a year-long public service campaign that perhaps this group could sort of help amplify our message. We're calling it Reduce Rain Runoff. And we're working to raise awareness around the impacts of stormwater runoff on our streams and rivers, but also our communities, and how marginalized communities are disproportionately impacted by stormwater runoff. So we have a web page on our website dedicated to it, monthly blogs and social media posts, and part of that, we're advocating for more green infrastructure to help reduce runoff and soak it into the ground. And we're advocating for that at the local and county government level, but then also just providing resources for property owners, residential properties, to help us reduce rain runoff and manage it on their property through things like rain gardens and rain barrels.
Evangeline.
Well, what we could use always is, first and foremost, more volunteers to help us plant trees. The second is we are launching a campaign in next month called Be Shady. And Be Shady twofold, you understand what that means. So, but we're kicking that off in Spartanburg. So any way to help amplify that message would be great. And more importantly, I guess I would say, is the partnerships. We're looking for partners, whether they be affordable housing complexes, or more corporate partners, more corporate donors, and donors in general. That's what we need. We're a nonprofit, so we're always looking for funding and opportunities to plant. But really, the education right now, I think, is one of the things that we're focusing on. So we need some ideas on how to get the word out at a low-cost way to residents, that planting trees is more than just a pretty object for the yard.
Well, thanks so much for folks keeping in mind in the chat. Becky and Renee have put some really good resources in there to follow up on. So I encourage you all to do that with our wonderful panel. I want to thank them for agreeing to meet and share their experiences. And I always bask in the glow of knowing folks who are doing such great work, needed work, and especially given all the challenges, and you're willing to be out there and fight the good fight. I will turn it back over to Rebecca to close this out and remind us for our future webinar series.
Yes, just echoing what a great discussion today. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. Showing here is just a slide. We have 3 more webinars planned in this current community engaged research series. You can see the dates there on the slide. Like I said, if you're registered for this one, you should be registered for future ones. We encourage you to share it widely. We have wide-ranging topics. The next one will be centered around a conversation with graduate students. Following that will be in May, looking at climate justice, food insecurity, and health disparity in African-American rural South Carolina. And then in June, we'll be looking at coastal health and climate risks with harmful algal blooms in northeastern North Carolina. So a lot on tap. We hope to see everyone there. I'll close it out here. Thank you so much to our panelists again. And I hope everyone has a great week.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you for being here, audience.